What if justice didn't just punish the body? It turned suffering into a public performance? In the Middle Ages, torture wasn't a secret. It was a language of power, carved into bone and burned into memory, across cities, castles, and church courts. Tonight, on Execution Stories, step into the dungeons, plazas, and castle halls where medieval rulers used fear as their sharpest weapon. These are 20 medieval torture methods, each one designed not just to hurt, but to warn everyone watching that they could be next. Let's start with number 1. The rack looked simple: a wooden frame, ropes, and turning wheels. But it was the iconic symbol of medieval interrogation. In places like England and across Europe, victims were bound at each end and slowly stretched, their joints pulled apart in a process everyone understood, but no one dared to defy. It was used by royal officials and state courts to extract confessions, especially in high-stakes cases like treason or conspiracy. What made it terrifying was not just the physical damage, but the knowledge that once you were taken to the rack, people expected you to confess to anything just to make it stop. Next, number 2, a device that looks like a nightmare made of metal: the Iron Maiden. Shaped like a human-sized coffin or statue, it opened on hinges and was lined on the inside with spikes, positioned to injure without instantly killing. Whether every claimed use is historically proven or not, the legend of the Iron Maiden did its own kind of damage. Its image, cold iron closing around a helpless prisoner, became a powerful symbol of medieval cruelty, and the total control dungeon keepers seemed to hold over life and death. Number 3 is the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, one of the most feared execution methods in late medieval Europe. The condemned person was bound to a large wooden wheel, while blows from clubs or iron bars shattered limbs and left them displayed high above the crowd. This was as much theater as punishment. Wheels were set up in open spaces, so everyone could see what happened to those who challenged rulers or laws. The slow, drawn-out ordeal turned the victim's body into a warning sign, making people think twice before stepping out of line. Next, number 4, the Judas cradle, a device whose shape alone made prisoners shudder. It was a pyramid-shaped seat mounted on a frame, with the victim suspended above it and lowered down by ropes, under the control of the torturer. Often associated with inquisitorial courts in Spain and Italy, this cruel device weaponized humiliation as much as pain. The victim's helpless position, the public shaming, and the constant threat of being lowered further turned the cradle into a symbol of complete domination by religious and secular authorities. Number 5 sounds small, but its reputation spread across Europe: the thumbscrew. It was usually a simple metal vise that clamped around a person's thumbs or fingers. As a screw turned, pressure built, crushing soft tissue and bone. The thumbscrew became popular precisely because it rarely killed. Courts and interrogators could keep victims conscious and terrified, squeezing out information or confessions, while leaving them permanently marked as someone who had crossed the wrong people. Next, number 6, the pillory. One of the most recognizable medieval punishments and a bridge between torture and public humiliation. The device was a wooden frame with holes for the head and hands. Once locked in place, the offender was stuck, standing in full view of neighbors, strangers, and enemies. Unlike purely secret dungeon tortures, the pillory turned the crowd into participants. People shouted, mocked, and sometimes threw waste or objects, making the social shame and fear of exposure as painful as any physical discomfort. Number 7 is the scavenger's daughter, a less well-known counterpart to the rack used in Tudor England. While the rack stretched the body outward, this metal frame compressed the victim into a tight, contorted position, forcing the body to fold in on itself. Used in the Tower of London on suspected traitors, it played on the horror of being crushed and confined. The fear here wasn't just of pain, but of feeling trapped inside your own body, unable to move. while officials calmly waited for the prisoner to crack. Next, number 8. The heretic's fork. A deceptively simple metal tool with 2 small prongs at each end and a strap to hold it in place. One end was set under the chin, the other near the chest or collarbone, keeping the victim's head fixed upright. It was reportedly used during inquisitorial procedures to prevent sleep, rest, or even normal movement. Any attempt to nod or slump drove the prongs into tender flesh, turning exhaustion into another weapon for breaking a person's resolve and forcing them to submit. Number 9. May be one of the most psychologically disturbing devices. The head crusher. This metal apparatus held the head between a lower cap and an upper plate. Turning a screw slowly pressed the plates together, closing in on the skull. Whether used in real cases or amplified by later tales, the idea alone was enough to terrify. Prisoners knew that once their head was locked inside, the torturer controlled just how far things would go, using fear of irreversible damage to push people toward confession or compliance. Next, number 10. The pear of anguish. A metal device shaped roughly like a fruit that could be expanded by turning a screw. Different sources describe it being used in the mouth or other orifices, where turning the mechanism caused the metal petals to spread apart. Many modern historians debate how often it was truly used in the Middle Ages, but its legend is powerful. For medieval and early modern audiences, just seeing or hearing about this device showed that interrogators were willing to attack the most vulnerable parts of the body to enforce obedience and orthodoxy. Number 11 is the Spanish donkey, sometimes called the wooden horse or wooden pony. It consisted of a sharp-edged, triangular beam that the victim was made to straddle, often with extra weights attached to the legs to increase pressure. Linked with the Spanish Inquisition and other harsh courts, this method turned a familiar image, someone sitting on a beam, into a tool of slow torment. It was designed to be seen by others, a prisoner forced to sit, helpless and exposed, while onlookers absorbed the message that the authorities could make even ordinary objects into instruments of terror. Next, number 12. The knee splitter. A hinged device lined with spikes or wedges clamped around the knees. When tightened, it drove the spikes inward and immobilized the joint, often leaving the victim permanently unable to walk without severe difficulty. Its purpose wasn't necessarily to kill, but to disable. In societies where manual labor and marching soldiers were vital, destroying someone's ability to move freely sent a clear warning to others. Betray us, and your future is gone. Number 13 is dunking, most famously used against accused witches and other suspected offenders. Victims were bound and repeatedly plunged into water, then pulled out again on the edge of drowning, sometimes in front of an entire village. In many regions, this ordeal had a twisted logic. If the accused floated, it could be taken as proof of guilt. If they sank, they might be pulled out if they were lucky. It blurred the line between trial and torture, turning survival itself into a kind of verdict, and leaving communities haunted by what they had watched. Next, number 14. Flaying. The removal of skin. With roots stretching back to ancient empires, but still referenced in medieval contexts. It was reserved for extreme crimes and traitors, and its reputation spread through chronicles, religious imagery, and later stories. The horror of flaying worked, even when people never saw it firsthand. Knowing that authorities claimed this power literally to strip someone's body apart helped reinforce a world where disobedience could lead to punishments too terrible for most people to even imagine in detail. Number 15 is the brazen bull, a hollow metal statue said to have been heated from below with a victim locked inside. Although its origins are more ancient and many historians doubt widespread medieval use, later writers folded it into the catalogue of medieval horrors, even if more legend than routine practice. The brazen bull became part of the mental landscape of punishment, an image of rulers so cruel they turned execution into a kind of staged performance. In dark history, The stories people believe about torture can be as powerful as the documented facts in shaping fear. Next, number 16. Coffin torture, where a victim was locked inside a rigid, human-shaped cage or frame and left suspended or exposed. Some accounts describe these cages hung in public spaces, where everyone could see the prisoner trapped, unable to sit, lie down, or hide. The psychological impact was enormous. Being displayed like this turned the body into a public notice board for crime and punishment, while the slow passage of time inside the cage broke down dignity and hope, even before death came. Number 17 is impalement, an especially brutal method associated with earlier and later periods, but also cited in discussions of medieval cruelty. It involved forcing a stake or pole through the body in a way intended to keep the victim alive for some time. Some rulers, like the infamous Vlad III of Wallachia in the 15th century, became historically linked with mass impalements as tools of terror. Tales of forests, of stakes surrounding roads or fortresses, were meant to make whole regions tremble long before they ever saw an enemy army. Next, number 18. Being hanged, drawn and quartered, one of the harshest penalties used in medieval and early modern England for high treason. The sentence combined hanging with mutilation and the later display of body parts in public places. This punishment was designed to be unforgettable. It sent a message that betrayal of the crown was not just a crime, it was an attack on the order of the realm, answered with a punishment that stretched on in stages long after the condemned person was gone. Number 19 might seem almost mild next to some devices, but in medieval towns, public whipping and flagellation were common and feared. Offenders were tied to posts or led through the streets, while blows landed in front of their neighbors, enemies, and families. This method blended bodily pain with public shame. In cities and villages where everyone knew everyone, the memory of seeing a known face punished this way could stick for life, reinforcing local norms more effectively than any written law code. And finally, number 20. The dungeon itself, dark cells, chains, and endless isolation, which might be the most quietly devastating torture device of all. Medieval castles, city towers, and ecclesiastical prisons often held suspects for months or years, in cramped, filthy spaces with little light and constant uncertainty. No elaborate mechanism was needed. The fear of never knowing when the door would open, or what would happen when it did, slowly wore people down, proving that in the Middle Ages, control over time and hope could be as cruel as any rack or wheel. These 20 medieval torture methods show a world where punishment wasn't just about crime, it was about power, performance, and fear. Devices, ordeals, and prisons turned human bodies into living messages, warning everyone else to obey kings, lords, and church courts, or risk becoming the next example. Subscribe to Execution Stories for more dark medieval history and brutal execution tales. There are still countless forgotten chambers, secret trials, and grim sentences waiting in the shadows of history, and this is only the beginning.